this is an actual, it's kind of an extended version of the presentation I did at the IDFA conference this year, and that we've changed the title a bit because I think the feedback we got was that the title did not really coincide with what I was talking about. So I got into thinking about this as a result of a master's program I did at Northwestern several years ago. And one of the classes talked about information transfer and data visualization and how it helps a lot of people understand information they wouldn't normally understand. Like Laura said, I've been doing this for about 10 years, and I didn't really notice people not understanding what I was telling them. I think a lot of times people who are successful in this business are successful because people trust them, and which is very well and good, but at some point you want them to understand what you're telling them and not necessarily just take your word for it. So I started digging a little bit more into this when I realized that when I asked a client to repeat back, it just finished telling me that they understood every word I said. And I started looking at financial planning reports. I started looking at the academic research, and went to a few different seminars, and realized that what we were doing in practice doesn't actually match what is best practices. So one of the guys that I went to go see is this guy named Edward Tufte. He is abbreviated in the parlance as E.T., and he's written several books, and he's kind of a minor celebrity as it relates to data visualization. Not necessarily financial, but I have been to a couple of his seminars, and I've actually went to a workshop with him a few months ago. So he has a lot of these little pithy quotes. Some of them, don't really apply, but we do a lot of we have some financial planning software. We have divorce financial planning software, and most of it is really just it kind of follows standard financial practices that probably should be revamped. This presentation, we're actually going to break it down into 3 parts. So we're going to talk about why, what, and how. And the why is, why do we care about visualizations and why do they matter? And the what is what makes a good visualization, what makes a bad visualization, and then the how is how you can put some of these things into practice in your own practice. So the idea is to kind of give you the background, and then kind of most of the presentation is actually on the how, because we want you to be using this stuff in your practices if you find it valuable. So why do visualizations matter? So most of the reason has to do with how we're built as humans and how humans process information. So visuals are processed through the prefrontal cortex. So if you look at the highlighted portion right here, if you can see my cursor, this is the prefrontal cortex. This frontal lobe also allows access to higher cognitive functions such as behavior and emotions. Now, I don't know about you, but I believe most people going through a divorce are probably experiencing some emotions and possibly some erratic behavior. I know that I don't think I've had a completely rational person in the divorce process, so I think that this is probably important for everybody to know. So the human brain processes visual information 700,000 times faster than text. So just kind of let that sink in for a minute. If you look at a picture, like this picture right here, you can kind of understand exactly what's going on, right? It's a girl looking through a magnifying glass. You've got some information about her age. You've got some information about, well, you obviously have information about her sex, so you know very quickly what this is. Now, if I had written all of that out, it would have taken you a lot longer to understand what was going on. The other thing, we're all primarily visual learners. I know that Some people like to say, oh, well, I learn better listening, kinesthetic learner, so kinesthetic is tactile, so if you know, putting IKEA furniture together is tactile learning. So there are certain tasks that are more suited to other types of learning, but overall, we are all visual learners. We're all primarily going to learn that way. Humans are in general wired to look for patterns. It's kind of how we came up with the constellations. You know, those are really just random patterns that we have, or random placements of stars that we've kind of fit to patterns, because that's what our brains are wired to do. We're wired to look for patterns so that we can be safe in the wild. And you know, just kind of to wrap it up, text has a low rate of information transfer, so it takes a lot longer for text to filter through the brain. It kind of goes along with the processing the visual pictures as well. So I know that a lot of financial people like to use spreadsheets. I like to use spreadsheets, and I can understand them. So I can look at a spreadsheet full of numbers, and I kind of get what's going on. I know that most people, especially those of you with accounting backgrounds, clearly understand spreadsheets and can process that information. But we do this every day. Most people in the United States experience number anxiety when they see a lot of numbers. Most people have low numeracy scores as it is, and have very low confidence about numbers. So when you show them a spreadsheet, it automatically increases their anxiety. All right, so I'm going to see if this works here. This is a video that's just going to see if you are easily distracted. A lot of people don't think they are. Let's see here.
Drink!
Oh, okay, this is probably inappropriate. There we go.
Most of us think we're pretty observant, but with a bit of mind control, I wanted to see if I could make these people take even the most obvious things for granted. Excuse me, do you know how to get to Trinity Church from here?
Yeah. See that church down there?
Yep, straight through there.
Keep going down.
Sorry.
You see that church is down there?
Yeah.
You start on that, which is a brief roadway. And then you walk down 2 or 3 blocks, and Trinity Church is on the right hand side. We're walking in that direction.
Excuse me, I don't know where Trinity Church is, do you?
Might be Wall Street and Broadway.
Okay. Well, we're down here somewhere, aren't we?
Yeah. See,
Trinity.
sorry. Yeah. It's like the Trinity Church right here. If you keep going that way, you will head all the way, then you go back 4 blocks.
That seemed almost too easy. So later on, I see how far I can take
So
it.
now it gets a little bit better.
Excuse me, do you know where Trinity Church is? Okay. Last time I switched with someone who looked a little bit like me, but where's the fun in that?
What do you think?
You know who resurrect you? The other side. See where that lady standing?
Sure.
That's the pool. No, the lady in the braid.
The other side.
Yeah, the other side of the
But you
pool.
say you don't know where it is.
Exactly what street, no, but in that direction.
Okay.
Yeah, okay?
So she kind of looks like she knows something's wrong.
Do you know where Trinity Church is?
Yeah, fine. Come on, I'll take you. You want to walk now?
I'm gonna catch some other people. Sorry, guys.
Okay, so once you go on Broadway,
Yes.
some of the numbers are going.
Okay, so
Once you hit the Broadway, you're going down.
Yes.
Walk up straight
that
that way, and just walk straight down. You're
Brilliant.
gonna see it, right? It's really broad.
That's brilliant. Thanks for your
All
help.
right, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
Excuse me. Do you know where Trinity Church is? Ah, great. Oh, where are we on here? We sort of there.
Right here. Go on.
So now this
We are.
is pretty telling.
You want to cross over there? Go down Broadway. No. Okay. Thank you.
See, she didn't even hesitate.
Should have, mate. Do you know this area? Do you know the area?
All right. So the reason I wanted to show that video is because we talked a little bit about how the brain works, and also when people are going through divorce and they're highly emotional, it's easy to get distracted. And when when you're easily distracted, you tend to make you tend to make some mistakes, and you can make some bad decisions. And part of what we do is we're trying to help people make really good financial decisions that will help them post-divorce. And this is just kind of a pictorial representation of some things that I'm sure we've all heard, but this is probably, this is how they feel in their head. It's coming from several different directions. They don't exactly understand, how they're going to be okay. I mean, that is the overarching question, is how am I going to be okay? And trying to process textual information or bad visualizations, like some software programs have, is really going to be pretty difficult for people. So we can help with good data visualization. Like we mentioned earlier, the processing speed of information is going to be faster, and properly constructed a visual representation can also be a little bit more efficient. And maybe even if you can do this quicker, you might be able to reduce costs and the time to actually getting an actual resolution. All right, so that's why it's important. So now, what makes a good visualization and what makes a bad visualization? In general, we do, in the financial industry, I don't know if you've ever looked at Morningstar reports or even most financial planning software. A lot of times it's very pretty. They do a really good job with colors, but it is not a good way to get data so that it is easily understood. Sometimes I feel a little bit like we're doing it on purpose so that we don't want people to understand it, so that we look like we are geniuses. And so I think that the industry as a whole needs to do some different things, and that's kind of bled over into the divorce financial profession. So, all right, okay, some basic principles. So bar charts are best for showing proportion. Line charts are best for showing change over time. And pie charts can be good to show proportion, but usually no more than 4 slices. And the reason for that, we'll get into pie charts a little bit later, but if you talk to most data visualization experts, they despise pie charts, or the newer donut chart, which is just basically a pie chart with the center cut out of it. The reason being is because we as humans we can see length very well, but we have a hard time perceiving angles and curves. So it is definitely, a pie chart is nothing but angles and curves. So we try not to use those. It's really difficult to get financial and business people to stop using them, but so if you must use them, please use no more than 4 slices. All right, so this is an example of a Monte Carlo simulation. I'm sure most of us have seen something like this before. There are a ton of really bad things about this. If this were an audience where I could interact with you, I would ask you questions, but I'm actually just going to point out some of the things that I think are bad. So the first thing is, ignoring the multicolored lines, is that we have an axis here that says value, but we don't know. This says dollar. We don't know if this is $20. We don't know if it's in thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. We don't know any of that. I mean, we can kind of say, well, maybe this is just a price graph and not an actual value graph. But then it says value, so we don't really know. And then if you look at the time axis, we have 0, 50, 100, 150, 200. But 0, 50, 100, 150, 200 of what? We don't really know. It could be minutes. It's probably unlikely, but it could be. It could be days. It could be months. It could be years. We don't actually know from looking at this. And then the other part of it is if you show this to a client and you're basically trying to give them, you know, when you show somebody a Monte Carlo simulation, you want them to understand that there is, you know, there's variation in the future of the market or the future of an asset appreciating. And so you kind of want to be able to explain to them, well, it can be any one of these things. But this is confusing. I mean, you can't really even follow a single line, so you don't really know what you're looking at. So this is what I would call a very poor visualization. So the next slide, I want you to do this. Normally in a live audience, I would time you, but what I want you to do is time yourself. So if you have your phone, get out your phone, and then when I move to the next slide, I'm going to say start, and then but before that, I'm going to ask you to find the 7th largest expense. It's going to be in an expense graph, and I want you to try to find it and then stop your clock and see when you do, or see when you do actually find the 7th largest expense. Okay? All right, go. I'll give you guys about 10 more seconds. So when I did this initially, somebody was really good and just figured it out very quickly. I think you'll find that it probably took most of you longer than 10 seconds. And in the case of people who are not really used to looking at things like this, it maybe would have taken them longer. The second time I gave this a variation of this presentation to some therapists, and it took the fastest one 40 seconds to find it. And that was out of a room of 30 people. That's probably a little slow, but it just kind of showcases the fact that these pie charts are not really good at conveying information. So you don't. This is actually like a representation of a chart that you might get from your summary expense, like on your credit card. All right. So if you're trying to figure out, you know, where you spent, you know, where your money went on your credit card, they give you this every year. I think most credit card companies do, but it's not really a good way of conveying that information. So what is a properly constructed visual? So it follows good design principles. So use of white space and color contrast. And when I say white space, just this of course is a almost completely white slide, other than the text. But the white space means, you know, you could use gray, you could use any number of things. It's mostly blank space because if you have more space, it allows you to focus on what matters. Your data to ink ratio is high. So what that is an Edward Tufte ET principle. And what that basically means is that the information that is in the visual is most of the visual. So you don't have a ton of text. You don't have a ton of fluff. So if you if you had a bar chart and then on a quarter of the screen and a dragon on 3/4 of the screen, the ink from the dragon doesn't really it distracts from the visual that you're trying to explain. So the visual needs to be appropriate for the information being conveyed. So for example, in our Monte Carlo example, you wanted to show change over time. You would not use a bar chart because it just doesn't make as much sense. And if you have, you know, several expenses, more than 4, a pie chart is also not a good thing to use. So let's get into some good visualizations. So if you remember the Monte Carlo, so here's a Monte Carlo, and if you look, you can kind of see just right initially the obvious differences. You have, and I'm sorry it's a little fuzzy. For some reason it didn't blow up nicely. But so you can look here and you can see that these are actually 6 months apart. So each of these tick marks is 6 months apart. So you can see that this runs from July 1994 to the end of December 2006. Actually, it doesn't say end of December, but it's proportion-wise, it looks like it's the end of December. And then you have your y-axis tick marks, and you can kind of see that this is 100,000, 200, 500, a million, 2 million. So you can really kind of understand what's going on here. And so then the other thing here is the contrast. So we talked in the last slide about contrast, and you can kind of see all of these simulations, but then you have the mean value, right? So this is the value that is sort of important, right? This is the average of all of these. So in this case, I mean, this is a really good investment, but $100,000 to 20 million, 12 years, you can kind of see the way it goes, but then you also have all of the other simulations kind of grayed out, so they aren't distracting from the information that you're trying to convey. And also, but it does also convey the piece that, hey, we ran a ton of simulations here. All right. So let's see here. All right. So this is just an income and expense graph. So a lot of times I see people, when they put budgets together, they don't put visuals on them. They usually just have a spreadsheet, and then there's a total income, and there's total expenses, and so you can it's really kind of difficult to just read those numbers and know exactly what's going on, and to understand the magnitude. Look at this. You can see that this person has salary net of taxes of $1,900, so that's their take home, and then $6,400 in expenses, which I'm sure we've seen before. I mean, this is divorce we're talking about, so somebody looking at a projected budget may have this type of shortfall. And so this kind of gives the magnitude of, okay, well, these are this person's expenses, and this is this person's salary, so there's this huge gap here, and we need to figure out what to do with this gap. Sometimes there's a little bit of an issue here because you don't want to scare somebody so much, and so it's possible that you don't want to bring this into a little bit later, but it is important to kind of show people exactly where they are short. So those are just two quick examples of what I would consider good visualizations. The scale is correct here. You have color contrast between two different things. This is expense, this is income. It's properly labeled. Your axis marks are correct. And we'll go from here. We'll go into that's what is a good visualization. From now we'll go into how to. So how to construct some of these. Some of these are constructed with a program called Tableau, which is just a data visualization program. You don't need to spend $1,000 on Tableau to create good visualizations. That last one was in Excel, and most people have Excel. I like Tableau because you can customize a little bit, and you can make visuals very quickly, and it automatically has some best practices. So they will only give you they will highlight the type of chart you should use for the data that you have, which is really helpful. So some of the things that we do in divorce. Cash flow, right? We want to look at cash flow. So here's an example of a current cash flow situation and then cash flow over time, right? Because you want to show both. Right, that's why we do the CDFA. We get to look at all those fancy charts. We look at what happens over time. We look at what happens in the moment. And so if you look here and you look at the current way things are looking, if you're the wife in this situation, you're thinking, hey, I've got a nice surplus. And if you're the husband, you're thinking, man, this really kind of sucks. I'm losing some money here. But then if you look at it over time, you can see where different pieces of support end, and then I annotated where child support ends and where alimony ends, and then asked, you know, what are you going to do? What's next when if you look, if you look down here at 2023, this person is, you know, operating at a very big deficit, and so what are they going to do the rest of their life? So how are we going to solve that? So this is important when you're trying to figure out what their future plans are. It's why we do what we do. I like having these side by side, because if you just show somebody this over here, it's hard to get them to understand this piece over here. So once you have them side by side, they've got both visuals they can look at, and they can say, okay, yes, we're taking care of your immediate need, but we need to help figure out what are we going to do here when this support ends. All right, so net worth. So net worth, I know people like to use, this is another situation where we want to use some pie charts. So there's two pieces of it. There's the global outlook, right? So if you're dividing, assume you're dividing an estate 50-50, you know, maybe a pie chart works to show proportion, although it's probably not going to show that 1 to 2 or even 5% depending on the size of the estate. So this is another Tableau graph. There are so you can see here, you can see the global piece, right? So you can see that this person is getting close to 1.3 million. This person is getting a little bit less than $900,000. Once again, because we can see length very well, we can I can judge that that's less than 900 very easily, and I can judge that that's slightly less than 1.3 million very easily. And then you can look at how it's allocated. So this person is, you know, is a business owner, and so they're hanging on to this business, and which is a large percentage of this portfolio. And you can almost see that it's, you know, it's a little bit, the business itself is a little bit less than $1 million. You can just actually look at this orange piece and figure that out. And then you can see they both probably have about the same cash. So when you're looking at this person's also keeping the house, and this person's just getting all the retirement and the brokerage assets. So you can kind of look at this and see, well, you know, in order to even this out, we have to do something creative, or some sort of, or be okay with an unequal distribution, or kind of, you know, go back to the drawing board and brainstorm some solutions. Let's go to net worth over time. So net worth over time. So this is what I want to show here is this is just one person, and the reason it's one person is not that you don't want to show both people all the time, but when you're initially working with somebody, in order to get like this that's going up, this person is going to be okay. But if you show them in comparison with somebody else and say that person is going up more, like most of our software programs do, that can interfere with actually getting some sort of agreement or resolution. And so if you can focus on the one person and know that that person is going to be okay, it will allow you to kind of get them into a mindset that they're not comparing themselves to somebody else, because that's a lot of the issue. I mean, there's a relativity is a well, it's a physics concept, but it's also a social science construct where we talk about, you know, you're only happy if you're doing better than the people around you, or as well. So if you're doing worse than the people around you, particularly somebody who is a spouse, if you're doing worse than that spouse, then you're not going to think that this increasing line is good. So once you've got them in that mindset, though, then you can kind of look at a comparison, right? So, you know, here we're looking at a situation where the wife here is starting off a little bit better, and then the husband's not. But then the husband, you know, after, oh, that is a lot of movement. After some time here, you actually start to see a change. And then once again, you're looking at both charts. So this is the snapshot, and then this is the chart over time. And what I would say is, yes, you clearly cannot see, dang it, the tick marks for over time here, but in an actual visualization, this is trying to squeeze this into a PowerPoint presentation is the problem. But you could actually put this and see the tick marks on a TV screen if you were working within. You could do it in Excel, or if you were working within Tableau. So you would definitely want to show the time frame. Here, at least, I kind of annotated a little bit. So expense management. So before I asked you to tell me the 7th largest expense in the pie chart, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing again, except for a different type of chart. And so I want you to tell me the 5th largest expense. Actually, I'm going to make it a little bit harder. I'm going to tell you to find me the 9th largest expense in these categories. And so that will hopefully show you that this type of chart is a little bit better for that kind of thing. So go ahead and time yourself starting now. I really don't think I need to go much beyond this because I'm pretty sure you guys already found it. So this is a chart of some expenses. This is somebody's actual real expenses, a client that I had, and of course their name's not on here. But I see that their monthly clothing budget, or what they spend on clothes, is clearly more than their mortgage, which is, not a small mortgage. And then, dining out and grocery are both pretty high. Usually, if one's high, then one's low. Of course, it's just asking the question, are you legitimately dining out this much and eating this much in groceries, or where are you shopping, so that you can kind of do some fact finding. But this is a good way of showing expenses, what somebody's monthly expenses are, and so that way you can kind of talk to them about, hey, I see that you spend $4,000 a month in clothes. Could we cut that down to 2 and maybe add some of that money back into your budget? All right, so these are kind of the basic things that you do in divorce, right? You're looking at financial affidavits, you're looking at equitable distribution affidavits, but there's a lot that goes into being a CDFA. Some people specialize in certain areas. I've done some separate property tracing, and often when you get people have a hard time following what you did, right? So if you start talking about, well, I took your statements, and then from when you got married, and then I calculated it forward, and you can say that, and you can even write it in a report, but it doesn't accurately convey, or doesn't quickly convey anyway, what you actually did. And so this is a situation where you can just create a flow chart to kind of show exactly what you did or what your process would be. Right? So this is a theoretical model of actually separate property tracing. Some people may do it differently. This is the way I kind of do it. And of course there are more pieces to this, so it's not just this yes/no flowchart, but what you can do is you can use this as a theoretical model, and then you can put in your inputs into this theoretical model, so the actual numbers, and then that will kind of flow through to the end, and you can kind of show them what you did. So I do a lot of pension valuations too. The next slide I actually have on my website, so people can go and just put some parameters in, and they can get 3 different values based on different discount rates for whatever their pension is. So this is a situation where you do need some text, because you're going to need to give them some information on the inputs you used. And then over here you can kind of see the comparison. If you're using a lower discount rate, you're going to get a little bit more money if you're using this. And then as the amount that the pension's worth goes down. So this is a good way to kind of point out that present value calculations of pensions they're point estimates. They're not actually what that thing is worth, and they're estimated based on these values over here to the left. So these are inputs that we use to kind of estimate that. And somebody could, of course, ask for something different. It's probably better. You can actually do this in Excel. And in fact, I did this in Excel before I put it on the website. And you can basically, just have the ability to change these so that it will change the charts. And so it also sets the expectation for people who think that, well, the value is the value. And the reality is that we all know that the pension value is not the value, that it's based on any number of factors, and so you can give them a little bit of a range here. In this case, it's a very big range. It's a $159,000 range. But you can give them that range to kind of, keep their expectations in line with what may happen. So if you were doing this for a court, for example, somebody may come in with a $250,000 valuation, and somebody may come up with a $400,000 valuation, and then you can see why, right? You just look at the discount rate and you can see why that occurred. All right. Business valuation. I know there's probably a few of you who do business valuations, and anybody who's ever looked at a business valuation report knows that they are very heavy, and they have a lot of information in there. There's a ton of text. Right, so we automatically know when there's a ton of text that we're going to process it much, much slower than if we had some visuals. So most business valuation software either don't use a ton of visuals, or the visuals they use are they use a lot of tables. Right, so there's a ton of tables, and I'm not telling you to not use your tables. Your report, and in your report you've got to follow these to follow best practices guidelines. But when you're presenting the information, I would encourage you to use something like a Tableau or a PowerPoint. You could even put some of these slides in a PowerPoint. And what I'm going to show you is these are actually Excel charts, and so when you're going through and you're trying to explain why you did certain things and why you weighted certain methods differently, having the visuals and then giving the information verbally is probably going to be a little bit better way to present that information. And so if you're going to court, and I know a lot of people, I know a few people who do use some good visualization practices that they basically use Adobe Illustrator, and they create some things from their reports when they go to court. So if you're going to go to court, or even in a mediation, and you're trying to show this, or a collaborative, it'd be a good idea to put together a presentation that shows this, as opposed to just handing somebody a report. I like this one. I mean, sometimes people will get a little. When they've got to pay child support and alimony, and they work really hard for their money, and so they're really concerned with giving it up, because they don't think that they should have to, because they work hard for it. So sometimes it's helpful to show a comparison of share of child care and share of income. So in this case, this particular husband is clearly doesn't have a lot of time with the kids, maybe because he travels, and then this wife here is basically doing all the child care. And then if you look here, she's, you're asking her to do it with 11, 12% of the income. which doesn't seem very fair. And so this is, a lot of times people think in terms of fairness, like it's not fair that I have to give up half of my income. It's not fair that this person, that this wife has to give up, 80% of her time and then try to figure out how to make it work. So these are some examples of things you can do. Whatever your practice looks like, you can add visualization best practices to it. Once again, I would encourage you to avoid pie charts and donut charts as much as possible, and to just be thoughtful when you do have a graphic that you're presenting to somebody, that you are conveying the information that you want to convey. Like I mentioned earlier, our industry is rife with people who do not use, that use graphics to confuse rather than to convey information. And I think that, we are in a subset of an industry that really doesn't have a ton of this. I think family law software, I don't know if Dan's on the call, but it's very robust, but probably overly complex for most clients. And the visuals have gotten better over the years, but they still don't follow best practices. And most other software doesn't either. So, until that happens, you're better off actually constructing these yourself. Here's some tools. So the Monte Carlos were created in R, which is a statistical software. You will need to learn how to code if you're going to do that, but it's kind of the only way to get. Most Monte Carlo simulations are going to have the lines all over the place, and they're not going to enable you to fade certain lines. There are some newer softwares. I think there's this thing called Advisor that can do that, and then even Riskalyze will do a simple version of a visual output of a Monte Carlo. Excel, tried and true. That's what you're gonna, that's what a lot of people make their charts out of anyway. So you can always use Excel. The newer version of Excel, I believe 2015, will use best practices most of the time. The problem is a lot of times the best practices, the stock charts with Excel are they're not as comprehensive as something like Tableau, but that's why Tableau costs $1,000 and Excel doesn't. So you can use any of these resources. There's plenty. There's other things you can use. You could use numbers with if you have Mac and you like using the Mac software. You can use you can customize some of the charts within a few of the financial planning software. I think MoneyGuide Pro allows you to do some tweaking, but not a ton of it. So those are some tools that you guys can use. All of those were used throughout this presentation. Those last two charts last two sets of charts were Excel. You can kind of see the difference between Tableau and Excel just from the font. And then those Monte Carlos were created in R. So I think we're ready for questions. I think we're right at 45 minutes. So I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, great. So guys, if anybody has any questions, then feel free to send them to the questions box in your GoToWebinar menu. Someone is asking if you also manage assets and how
Yes.
you might use data visualization in your asset management.
Avoid pie charts. But no, seriously, yes. So I do incorporate this into working with clients. One thing that I'll do is kind of show them, what a good thing to show somebody is if you're looking at people come in when there's a bad month, right? And Excel does a really good job of this too. You can actually plot their statements over time. So say this is somebody you've had for a while. You can plot their statements over time, and then Excel will give you a simple regression line to show you that over time their account is increasing in value, and that what they're talking about is a snapshot in time. It does a really good job of showing them, and I don't have an example right here, but it does a really, without names on it, but it does a really good job of showing people that piece of it, if you've noticed, your account has been trending upwards. Of course, it doesn't work as well if you started in 2008 with this client and it's 2009. You're not going to see as much of an upward trend, so you have to be kind of careful about what you're doing. But you do want to present the information accurately. The other thing is if you're looking at asset allocations, so when you're talking about actually having people in different investment buckets and different types of investments, that's one of the reasons. Like if you look at a mutual fund pie chart of how they're holding, and then you look at the United States budget side by side, they look almost the exact same because there's so many slices in there, and that's just really confusing. So you can use something that's called we call it a heat map, which is a little bit better at conveying that information. Tableau does automatic heat maps. You can create an Excel heat map. It takes a little bit of wrangling if you know how to do macro in Excel. You can create a heat map there. You can also do it in most statistical software, but that's a better way of showing an asset allocation. It's easier for somebody to understand it as opposed to trying to look at 100 different things in a pie chart.
Fair enough. How would you recommend showing a data set with 20 different categories? Currently, we use a pie chart.
Bar chart. And I would use it doesn't need to be a time series, it's not a time series bar chart, but I would use a bar chart to show that. You could use, if you go back to, not that one, right here. So you could use one of these stack bar charts. And once again, so if you want to show that proportion, it's just easier because we see that we see length so much better than we do anything else. So I would definitely recommend you use one of these. With 20, it's still going to be rough, so I would almost want you to just use individual bars, because even here you could fit 20 on here and it would be fine. More slender bars, but it would be better to show them that. It'd be better to show them that way.
All right, we have a couple of software questions. They want to know if you have any thoughts on MoneyGuide Pro or Visio software.
So I don't like MoneyGuide Pro, but mostly because MoneyGuide Pro gives you too much. The data to ink ratio is too low, so there's a lot of stuff on there, but not a lot of information is being presented. The software, is very comprehensive, so I think that if you're doing a lot of planning, it's helpful, and if you're doing any kind of what if scenarios. But then what I would do is I'd encourage you to get something like Adobe Pro and customize your PDFs with some actual visuals from Excel or anywhere else. Visio, I actually don't know anything about Visio, so I would be curious to learn more about it. So I don't know if it's that's not the company that owns Advisor, I don't think, but Advisor software actually looks pretty good. They have a few issues, but it looks pretty good.
All right. Laura says, I was told that we can't give a client an Excel spreadsheet based on their own data due to the possibility of error. Are you just using them in-house?
Am I just using them in-house? I mean, I don't have an issue with where there is the concern the error is a human error or the software error? Because I would not. I mean, if the concern is software error, then I can see the point. But if it's human error, I mean, we make errors all the time. I wouldn't. I would definitely. And I'm an RA, so I don't really. I don't really work it.
Okay.
I don't know if that answered the question. I would say, yeah, I do everything in-house. So.
Okay. What are the most common charts you use with divorced clients?
So it's a good question. I mean, mainly bar charts and line graphs. I don't think you really need to do much more beyond that, just simply because it conveys the information efficiently and quickly. It's not fancy. What I would say is if you want to get fancy, you can use some colors. But I like to use a couple of different charts on the same screen at the same time. That way, you know, people are thinking about it, you know, thinking about like, I don't know if you look like this one in particular, where you have a snapshot and then you also have it over time. I think that, you know, you with bar charts, and I mean, I think part of the problem is people don't like just using bar charts all the time, and I get it. You don't want to keep using the same thing over and over, but it is really one of the best ways to communicate information.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's probably about all the time that we have for today. We have a couple questions that we'll send to Michael afterwards, but I think that about wraps up our webinar for today. Thank you so much, Michael, and just let us know if there are any other questions, and we'll send them on to Michael.
All right, thanks everybody.